Hello friends, Craig Ballard with you, repping the Tight Coverage crew. As always, want to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend a few minutes with us here. So we're bringing this video to take a look at something that is almost 14 years old, but I feel has a bad rap and certainly some revisionist history. I'm talking about the Vince Carter trade by your Toronto Raptors. Almost daily, I'm still seeing people talk about this as the worst thing in franchise history, and my question in this video is to take a look at, was it? So to check something like that, we will take a look at what the landscape of the National Basketball Association was at that time. We'll also take a look at back in memory lane of some of the Toronto Raptor moves as well, and a little bit more as we really dive into this. Let's get started. Over the two previous seasons, the Mavs had amassed 112 wins, but they lost their point guard for nothing, who is about to solidify his Hall of Fame status by winning back-to-back MVPs in the desert. The Nets were forced to trade All-Star Kenyon Martin in exchange for 3 draft picks who did not amount to much, unfortunately for the Nets, and Jay-Z at the time, part owner. In LA, this got split up after trading Shaq for basically Lamar Odom and Jordan Farmar, since Caron Butler and Brian Grant only lasted one season as Lakers. During this time, there were 3 star players traded, with similar situations to the VC trade in that the relationship on one side or the other was over. Chief amongst them, the Orlando Magic forced to trade the 2-time defending scoring champion Tracy McGrady for what ends up being brief stints by Kelvin Cato and Cuttino Mobley, and the next season Steve Francis was traded away after an up-and-down stint that included a suspension by the Magic and a suspension by the NBA. Yikes. 25-year-old Baron Davis, all-star, was traded by New Orleans to Golden State right as his star window was opening, but he was in a disgruntled relationship with management and his nagging injuries were wearing thin on the fan base. Vince Carter scenario. After standing by then Ron Artest after the brawl in Detroit, the Pistons were stunned and genuinely hurt by Artest's trade demand. There were also young budding stars like Rajon Rondo and LaMarcus Aldridge being given away for free as well. As far as Raptors franchise history, Doug Christie was a good player for the Raptors, and would you believe he still is the owner of 5 Toronto Raptor team records? Him being traded in his prime to Sacramento for Corliss Williamson, not sure I'm crazy about that. And of course, speaking of the franchise, Damon Stoudemire, first superstar in franchise history, right away Raptors of course forced to trade him. They trade him to Portland for Kenny Anderson, who of course refused to play in Toronto. Also Gary Trent, who lasted all of 13 games. 2 first-round picks that were traded for Kevin Willis, and thank goodness, even though his career was certainly robbed by injuries, thank goodness Alvin Williams was part of that trade as well, or that cupboard would have been bare. Even worse is the Raptors were able to find a trade partner for Kenny Anderson, the Boston Celtics, who gave up Chauncey Billups, who they had just taken number 3 overall in that draft. But the Raps, after only 29 games, had already given up on the player who would go on to be a 5-time All-Star, NBA champion, Finals MVP, and earn the name Mr. Big Shot. Tracy McGrady, T-Mac, 7-time All-Star, 2-time scoring champion, Hall of Fame basketball player. Only thing the Toronto Raptors received in return in that trade was a lottery pick, Fran Vasquez. Fran Vasquez is the only lottery pick ever in NBA history not to play in the league. Yikes. Speaking of Hall of Famers, Chris Bosh, CB4 going to be there one day. Raptors trading him, and he's entering his prime for 2 first-rounders and a trade exception. One of the first-rounders, they get back their own from the Jermaine O'Neal, Sean Marion trade, and they use it to draft Jonas Valanciunas, so nice job there.
Wade up top. He gets a pick from Bosh. Wade turns the corner. Behind his back. Bosh for the lead. Got it! 5:10 left. Bosh hits a 3. His 3rd from a step beyond the line. Look at LeBron James mobbing Bosh.
Now, a few major points to keep in mind when evaluating this deal is A, the relationship between the Raptors and VC was over. Carter was his least effective he'd ever been on offense, and the Raptors were not even playing him in fourth quarters of close games, if you recall that. And B, the league knew that Carter had insisted on a trade. Is that the Toronto Raptors were forced to trade their franchise player, and when you look in comparison to other trades and other deals, in particular at that time in the NBA, not a bad return haul. If your beef with it is what they did with the assets afterwards, in particular the draft picks, I certainly hear you there. I don't have a problem with that. But again, I feel that the trade itself, not as bad as the revisionist history has perhaps made it out to be. If you take a look at, even going forward, what did the Utah Jazz get for Carlos Boozer when he left in his prime? And what did the Phoenix Suns get from Arie Stoudemire when he left in his prime? Portland Trailblazers with LaMarcus Aldridge leaving in his prime. And, of course, LeBron James, the first time around that he left the Cavs. As we tape this now, the Cavs currently in round 4 of their NBA Finals with the Golden State Warriors. But I certainly do anticipate that LeBron is going to be leaving Cleveland for a second time in a matter of weeks. But remember that first time around, that infamous The Decision Show with Jim Gray on NBC, you remember that the Cavs got nothing in return for LeBron James. Now, as far as this being the worst thing in Raptor franchise history as well, I mean, how did that Rafer Alston 6-year, $30 million contract work out? How did that Yogi Stewart 6-year, $24 million contract work out? Linus Kleiza, 4 years, $20 million. Jason Kapono, remember that one-off season where we gave all our free agent money to Jason Kapono? How did that work out? Landry Fields, my goodness, if you remember that, the Raptors trying to block the New York Knicks from making a run at Steve Nash because the Raptors were going to get Steve Nash. How did that work out? How did that Hakeem Olajuwon signing, 3 years, $17.4 million work out? How did that Hedo Turkoglu contract work out? So, folks, I think we see a laundry list of trades and moves in franchise history that are significantly worse than the return haul, at least on paper, at least at that time, that the Toronto Raptors got for Vince Carter. Thanks again for spending this time with us. Absolutely would love it if you'd hit that subscribe button, that like button, help share Tight Coverage's work. And until next time, Craig Ballard, the Bald Wonder. We'll see you soon.